If you were disappointed with the lack of great GPU deals on Black Friday, it looks like some stores were holding out on us. The RX 6800 XT has just dropped to $439.99 on Newegg, and that is actually an exciting GPU deal. I've also noticed, as kind of an honorable mention since I'm already doing the video, that the 6650 XT has dropped to $209.99 on Amazon. So if that's more in your price range, and honestly guys, I think most people are looking for a solid upgrade somewhere in the $200 to $500 range. And so this is kind of hitting the lower end and the upper end of that budget. And let's talk about why these are good deals, especially the 6800 XT. And so let's talk about the 6800 XT. So first of all, this gives cards like the RTX 4070 an absolute run for the money at this price, a significantly lower price. So what are we looking at here? This is some testing for a video I did a number of months ago. I guess I don't need to run the audio from it in the background here. But if you look at here, this is the relative performance in average FPS, the 6800 XT and the 4070. This was me testing out, Fortnite, which was one of our first Unreal Engine 5 games. And if I kind of scroll through here, you can see that, with some ray tracing enabled, the 4070 does pull ahead. But, it's fairly even in this game. In Cyberpunk, without ray tracing, we can see the 6800 XT taking the lead. With heavy-duty ray tracing, yes, the 4070 is well out in the lead and does offer things like frame generation, a better upscaler like DLSS versus FSR2. There are certainly some advantages here, although you can see that the lighter the ray tracing workload, the less the gap. Like if we're down to RT low, which is what we're seeing here, they're actually basically tied. So depending on how heavy the ray tracing effects are in the game, you maybe don't lose too much performance. Here in like Resident Evil 4 Remake, at max settings, which does include some light ray tracing, the 6800 XT is still ahead. So, if it's a game where the ray tracing effects are designed more for consoles, you might not see that big of a performance gap between them. But anyway, that's my testing versus the 4070, and they're definitely trading blows, and there are certain games where there's bigger gaps. But here's my point. Let's look at current pricing. So if I jump to a site like PC Part Picker, which lets you survey the GPU prices sorted low to high for any particular model at a whole bunch of retailers. This searches Newegg, Amazon, Best Buy, B&H Photo, a whole bunch of the vendor-specific, board partner sites, whole bunch of stuff. We can see that the cheapest 4070s right now have gone back up to $560. Over the Black Friday-ish time frame, we did see some down to about $515, but currently $560 for a 4070. And so if we look at, 560 divided by 440, this means that the 4070 currently costs 27% more money. And as we just saw, these are offering extremely similar gaming performance when you're not using heavy-duty ray tracing. So, certainly something to consider. Now, there's also the power consumption to consider. The NVIDIA GPU is more power efficient. You do have an AV1 encoder for streaming on the newer generation. You do have frame generation. I'm not saying the 6800 XT is better than the 4070, although it does have a bit more VRAM. But I am saying that at current pricing, 440 versus 570, 570 or 560, what was it, 560 or 570? Man, I'm already forgetting what our pricing was. Yeah, 560 might just be out of your price range, right? And 440 might be totally in your price range. So take a look at that. Now, how does it stack up against some other GPUs from the current generation, like that actually cost a similar amount? So if we check out the 4060 Ti, the 8GB model is about $370, so that is a bit cheaper. But it's only an 8GB card. A lot of people have some issues with that for longevity. So if we check out the 16GB version of the 4060 Ti, this is actually the closest price competitor to the 6800 XT pricing right here. $442 on the cheapest model for the 4060 Ti 16GB. Now, how do these stack up? Well, I've actually tested that recently. 6800 XT versus 4060 Ti 16 gigabyte performance difference. We're looking at Remnant 2 here in Unreal Engine 5. And we're seeing a 53% advantage, 33% advantage at 1080p, 45% advantage at 1440p, and jumping to a 53% advantage at 4K. This probably has a lot to do with the lack of memory bandwidth on the NVIDIA GPU, the 4060 Ti, as you scale up to the higher resolutions. And again, as we look at some other games, Star Wars Jedi Survivor, with ray tracing enabled, the 6800 XT actually still pulls ahead, although it's honestly just pretty similar performance, and that's with ray tracing enabled, because if you come from a higher baseline without ray tracing enabled, like here's just 1080p high, no ray tracing, the 6800 XT has a 31% lead. So if you then enable ray tracing and you lose some of that lead, you might still have a lead. Again, this not being a game with super heavy ray tracing effects or anything like that. Here we're looking at 1440p epic settings with ray tracing on. The 6800 XT actually has a 15% lead and is able to average 60 FPS through my test run here versus the 52 on the 4060 Ti 16 gigabyte. So definitely interesting stuff. Jumping up to 4K epic with RT on, we're seeing the 6800 XT with a 22% lead, although I don't think you'd really use those settings. Anyway, as I scrolled through here, you can basically just see it's victory after victory for the 6800 XT, just varying by the amount pretty much. But it's usually fairly significant, and even with ray tracing enabled, is usually still a win for the 6800 XT, although in the more extreme examples, like RT Ultra in Cyberpunk, especially if you're kicking on like DLSS quality and frame generation and things like that. Again, there are some of those specific cases where the NVIDIA GPU might be the better option, but it's looking like more often than not, in the types of ray tracing effects that most games have on offer, it's less of a big deal. Anyway, so that's how it stacks up against the current NVIDIA price competitor, which is certainly interesting. But how does it stack up against AMD's own current generation? Well, if we go ahead and pop on over to AMD, this offers similar performance to the 7800 XT. But the 7800 XT right now costs a minimum of $490, and most models are over $500. And so how does that stack up? Well, in the 7800 XT review, I did take a look at the 6800 XT versus the 7800 XT, and here we can see that sometimes the 7800 XT is faster. Especially, I was noticing this in Immortals of Avium, which is kind of a newer, Unreal Engine 5 game. Things like that. I was looking at if there was any FSR3 differences. Looks like they both run it about the same. But in a lot of other games, they're performing very similarly. Again, sometimes the 7800 XT is a little bit faster here, but they're generally within the same sort of ballpark if you compare the 6800 XT here to the 7800 XT. So usually a bit of a win for the 7800 XT, but they're within the same general performance range. So what do I think about that overall? I think that the pricing right now does make a pretty big difference, and that's interesting. So if we're looking at basically $490 versus $440, you could make an argument the 7800 XT for an extra 11% price. You do get a little more energy efficiency. You do get the AV1 encoder if streaming to YouTube or something like that, or other content creation reasons is something useful for you. But overall, I think it still stacks up pretty well, although again, we did see some situations where the 7800 XT did justify its price increase over this 6800 XT at this price point. But anyway, overall, interesting stuff. And then I'm also seeing, like I said, the 6650 XT, if you're more in this $210 price bracket, also being a pretty compelling option, mainly due to the fact that it's from a performance standpoint. You know what, why don't we pop over to Tech PowerUp's GPU database? I know this thing isn't always perfect and all that, but I didn't pull up a bunch of testing for the 6650 XT like I did for my 6800 XT here. But if we set this as a baseline performance, It performs very similarly to AMD's newer generation RX 7600 and NVIDIA's RTX 4060. Now, some outlets would have a larger performance gap here, maybe more like 5 or 10% jump for these GPUs. And again, the 4060 having DLSS, having frame generation, things like that. But once again, if we take a look at pricing right now, the 4060 has gone up to $300 again, which was its launch price. We briefly saw some sales bringing it down to more like the $280 range. But it is right back up to $300 now. So if you're looking at it from that perspective, that's a massive difference. $300 versus $210 is a 43% price increase if you want to get the 4060 over the 6650 XT. And that's a massive difference. Some people can afford a $200 GPU, can't afford the $300 GPU, and what do you get for it? Like I said, I do think the 4060 is better, but that's a massive price difference to pay. So definitely something to think about. And AMD's 7600 would be AMD's newer generation competition, but that's up here at $250 price point on the cheapest models, which, is priced, I think, aggressively versus the 4060, but versus AMD's own 6650 XT here at $210. Again, if we go 250 versus 210, we're seeing that you'd be paying about 19% more money to go with the newer generation 7600 for within 5% or so of the same performance numbers. You do get an AV1 encoder, so that's cool, but if that doesn't really affect your gaming performance, not everybody's going to be streaming to a platform that, not everybody's going to be streaming at all, and if you are you streaming to a platform that supports AV1, or are you doing any kind of content creation that supports that? Other than that, there's not really a feature set difference at this point to differentiate the 7600 versus the 6650 XT. So I guess what I'm saying here is that if you were disappointed by your Black Friday sales, these two GPUs right now are offering very compelling price to performance against both the AMD and NVIDIA competition at these price points. And in general, I hope that we see some other, deals going into, the Christmas season, that kind of a thing. Given how lackluster the Black Friday sales were, I'm not sure we'll see anything too much more exciting than this. If you guys are interested, I am going to post links to these and affiliate links so that I can earn money without charging anything extra for you. And I view that as a win-win. I look out for good deals and can take a finder's fee for presenting them to you. Anyway, hopefully you guys found this video useful and or interesting. Huge thank you to subscribers. Huge thank you to channel members who have clicked the join button to directly support the channel financially. Huge thank you to everybody, and I hope all of you have an excellent day.